If, um,
Okay.
Good evening, friends. I, Haimanti Bagchi from www.tellmeastory.biz, welcome you this evening for a discussion on the book Trihayani, the untold story of Draupadi. I'm privileged to be in the company of author Rupande Mehta. Tellmeastory.biz calls for registration for TMYS review September 2022. Dawn drinks in association with York Center for Asian Research. Last date of submission is 20th June. Let me begin with introducing the author, Rupande Ma'am. Rupande Mehta is an Indian immigrant, a professional and activist for causes related to violence against women, environment, and social justice. In 2020, Rupande ran for state senate in New Jersey's 25th district and received the most votes ever. Her first book, Trihayani, The Untold Story of Draupadi, was released in April 2022. She can be found on Instagram by the name at the rate RUPEEAT and at the rate RUPANDEMEHTA on Twitter. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to meet you.
Yeah, same here. So let's with our first question for the day. The title of the book Trihayani, which means the birth of Draupadi in three yugas. So, could you please share the significance of this title?
Well, I will tell you a story about it. I when I finished writing it, and I shared the story with my brother, who works and lives in Mumbai. He read the first chapter, and at that time I didn't have a name for the story. It was just one of those things where I was still kind of struggling to figure out what to name this story. I gave it to him, and I said, he's a director. He does soap operas and stuff on TV, and I said, well, can you think of a title? He's more creative in sort of those ways. And he read the first chapter, and he came back to me and he said, what do you think of Trihayani? And I thought for a split second, and I said, "Oh my God, why didn't I think of that?" And there's a mention in, if you read, the first chapter, there is a mention of Trihayani. It explains what it means. And why it's there. And so when he said that to me, I said that is the perfect name for this book, because in doing so, what he did was, not only was the book christened, but it was also, the name encapsulated the entire spirit of the story. And I'm not going to tell you what that is, because that's why you have to read the story. But needless to say that, you go on a journey with Draupadi. And the name Trihayani is a significant portion of that journey.
That's really exciting, and I'm sure that everyone would be excited to, at least read about it because of the name, first of all. Second, again, another question, which is, I think, very important for me to ask you today is that the women in mythology, and especially to speak about the protagonist of Trihayani, they are all celebration of female consciousness. Out of all other magnificent women in mythology, what inspired you to explore Draupadi?
I love her. Absolutely adore the character of Draupadi. There is there's a lot of talk of divinity, right? When we look to Indian mythology, we have such a wide array of characters, of women who are, usually portrayed in very powerful forms. And unfortunately, that's not the case in real life. As much as divinity is portrayed, women in divinity are portrayed, women in real life are not. And there is that imbalance there. The thing I love about the character of Draupadi is that, she comes forth as a common woman. And what I mean by a common woman is, she doesn't come forth as divine, right? She's got a weird different sort of birth. She comes out of the fire. She's born to sort of, give her father, the tools that he needs to go and, wage a war and to destroy the person who has insulted him. But at the same time, when she came out of the fire, she wasn't asked for. Her father only asked for a son. He only asked for Drishtadyum, and he did not want a daughter because the daughter wasn't going to do anything for him. He simply wanted someone who could go and kill Drona. So Draupadi was an afterthought. So I feel that, in so many subtle ways, her life is such a poignant reminder of what women in life go through every day, right? Women are usually reduced, although this is now changing very slowly. Women are usually reduced to an afterthought. Women are not, the girl child is not wanted, the boy child is wanted. And I feel that there's so many parallels when you look at that and you look at Draupadi's life. You also, in my reading and in all the research that I have done just for general reading and for this story, I have never come across a queen, in mythology or otherwise, who was assaulted the way Draupadi was assaulted, at a time when she had, and she had a period at that time when she was going through her monthly cycle. Um, and I think that that again is a parallel to women are frequently obviously more assaulted than men face these sorts of violent situations. And again, that is a reminder that although she was a queen, she was also, she had this life whereby we could take so many things out of it. The other very sort of, one part of sort of like aspirational part of Draupadi, if I were to say, is the fact that she was married to five men. And I know that there's another instance in history where this happened, but in mythology, for a woman to marry five men is almost unheard of. Like that sort of reverse polygamy is never talked about. You never sort of, you never sort of give a woman that much power. And for me, all of these things combined, and the story of her life and just the sheer power that she exhibited throughout her life make her divine, although she wasn't divine. I think, or although the customary narrative is that she wasn't divine. To be married to the five greatest warriors of all time, to be handling their moods, to go through so much in life, and then still be standing. I think that a normal, there was a divinity aspect to her, that came forth in the story to sort of spread the message that women are strong, women are divine, and these things shouldn't happen with women. But as we enter into this new age, this is sort of becoming more and more normal and sort of the reality that we face wherever we go. So Draupadi for me is in so many different ways, not just a protagonist for Mahabharata, but a protagonist for women everywhere, for a protagonist for my own personal life, where, I seek to sort of understand her every day. And the more you sort of peel the layers of her character, the more vividly she comes out and more strongly she manifests her strengths. And I absolutely adore the character. Very long answer to your short question.
No, it's really intriguing for me to hear about Draupadi like this, and certainly, like you said, that the life of a warrior, as it was for Draupadi, may it be the innate fight against the injustice, fight for her own rights, the society about her polyandry, which you were saying, and also her thirst for revenge. She lived for till the great battle. She lived for it, the revenge in her. Yet we can say that she was not invincible, and was greatly affected by the conflict and would become emotional. What kind of challenges did you face while placing her as a protagonist, with all her complexities, vulnerabilities, inhibitions, and conflicts?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because there is this narrative that Draupadi was responsible for the war, right? Like she's the one who caused the war. And I feel that that is such a patriarchal way of depicting a woman, right? It's kind of like, when a woman is wearing a short skirt and she goes out and a man attacks her. And the narrative is, well, if she wouldn't have dressed like that, then the man wouldn't have attacked her. Never mind that the man has absolutely shown no control over anything, but we're going to shift the entire responsibility, the onus of everything onto the woman and forget what the man did. And I think that, again, this is sort of a way of showing that, that's what happened with Draupadi. I personally do not believe, obviously, that she was a cause of the war. The war was not caused by Draupadi. The war was caused by Dhritarashtra. The war was caused by Duryodhan. It was caused by people who could not reign in their power, who could not reign in their greed, and their avarices, and they wanted to go ahead and acquire more and more and more. Again, a parallel to the modern world, where we are literally reducing the environment to ashes. We're reducing every form of social justice to ashes because we want to conquer more and more and more. So I think that there's so many parallels like this. And then you blame the marginalized, or you blame the people who are you know weaker in a sense. You blame the tribals, or you blame the natives, or you blame the women, or you blame the children, whoever, right, for your own end and for your own greed. So I think that that's sort of what happened in the Mahabharata as well. In terms of your real question as to how was I kind of portraying her complexities, and how I dealt with it, I don't think she wanted war. And I know that is not a traditional sort of approach to Draupadi. As you mentioned, she was seeking revenge. I don't even think she was seeking revenge. I think that she was very angry, because who would not be angry at what happened to her? But I also think that she shared a very close relationship with Krishna. And if you remember the story, Krishna goes to the Dhritarashtra in a plea attempt, to give the Pandavas 5 villages at the end of it, and says, let's just call this a day. Give us 5 villages. Give the brothers 5 villages. We don't want anything more to do with the kingdom. And Duryodhan says no. And he says, if you do that, then there is peace. He tries everything, to come to a peace agreement, and the Dhritarashtra and Duryodhan don't agree with it. I think that the relationship that Krishna and Draupadi shared was at a very different level, than what we have traditionally understood. And because of that relationship, I find it almost impossible to believe that Draupadi wanted war when Krishna wanted peace. Um, I think the two were singing from the same tune, and I believe that Draupadi was as much for peace as much as she was for making sure that her husbands got what they want. Right? Like Krishna talks in the Bhagavad Gita when he's narrating to Arjun, he says, fight for what's yours. Don't worry about the rest, but fight for what's yours. And if for that you have to wage a war, then you wage a war, right? So I think for that, she understood that we had to fight for what was ours. But at the same time, I don't think the war was because she wanted revenge. And the biggest sort of telltale here is that for me, that she was an ambassador of peace, is at the end of the war, her children are killed, right? Drona's son, Ashwatthama, he goes in, he thinks he's killing the Pandavas, but he goes into the tent after everything is said and done, and he kills the 5 sons. And what does Draupadi do? She forgives him. She says to Krishna says to her, and Arjun said to her, listen, this is the guy who killed your sons. Whatever verdict you want to hand down, go ahead and do it, and we will make sure it's carried out. And Draupadi says, you're free to go. So how can a woman who sacrificed her sons, and the person who killed her sons forgave that person, would want revenge for something like this that happened to her? It does not make sense to me. I think that she was an ambassador of peace. I think she wanted peace, but at the same time she knew, because she was divine, that we would have to fight in order to get what is ours. And that fight is at many different levels, right? Like we have these fights on a daily basis, and these are stories for us, that look very great on the silver screen and nice to read in a book, and they're very difficult to implement. And we were talking about this before the live broadcast started, how difficult it is to sort of put into practice what you're reading in your daily life, about the scriptures and about the gods and the goddesses. And I think the story here is stand up to injustice. If it's happening to you, even if it is somebody who's the closest person, if it's your father, your grandfather, your cousin, your mother, whoever it is, if there's an injustice happening and you don't stand up, then you are doing a disservice to humanity and to yourself. And I think that is the message that we ought to take out of here. So I don't think it was a fight for revenge. I think it was a fight for standing up against injustice. And that was where she said, yes, we need to fight.
That's great. I have always wondered about how stories, especially mythology, influences our daily lives.
Mhm.
When we talk about the kind of violence, even at the time we exist now, like in Kali Yuga, so as an activist yourself, do you think that these stories about these multifaceted women in our mythology would be able to empower women who are still subdued somewhere by societal and cultural norms?
Absolutely. I drew, I got my power from mythology a lot. I lived in India for a very long time before I came here. I spent my childhood and my college years in India. I lived in Mumbai, and I was always attracted to mythology. And I think one of the reasons why is not just because they tell wonderful stories, although they are very, very exciting for children and the way they're portrayed and so forth. But like I mentioned earlier, I think that you have to break through the story to get to the message. There are many hidden nuances in mythology that help us with our daily life, right? Like, even just look at the life of Draupadi. And I think we've talked about so many different examples already about her being assaulted, about her not being wanted, about her being an ambassador of peace, like so many different things but at first glance, when we look at it, we're like, oh, she came out of the fire. Wow, that's so cool. But break through the nuances, like peel the layers to see what does that mean? What is that trying to tell you in terms of a story, right? And how does this woman who's not wanted then suddenly become one of the strongest women that we've ever known in Indian mythology? Through her sheer power, right? Like through everything that she does. She's a very controversial topic. But again, which strong woman that you know of is not a controversial topic, right? Any woman who tries to raise her voice becomes controversial, is called names, is debunked by society. Why? Because we fear strong women, right? Society doesn't like women who can talk about the rest and who are sort of having a following, and Draupadi has a huge following. And I think that there are so many ways, like, we deify Ma Durga, and we deify Ma Parvati and Ma Lakshmi and all of them. But do you really think that they didn't have power? Like, that is the silliest notion. Like, we always think that they were these pativrata women who just always
Mm.
believed what their husbands told them. Do you really think that that's possible? Like, these were all very strong women that we talk about, and there's so much from their lives that we can take. But unfortunately, we sort of suppress that, and we want to only show that side. Like, let's talk about Durga. Durga's one of the Parvati's manifestations is Durga. The other manifestation is Kali. Nobody can control Kali when Kali comes forth, right? Even Shiv has to lie down on the floor to appease her so that she would calm down. And that's not just the temper side of her, that's the power, that's the sheer power that comes out when she sees injustice. So there's so many things that we can take out of it. But I think society in general likes to sort of suppress those because that's not convenient for their agenda to make women strong and to make women, stand out there and to give them the power. So unfortunately, what we got to do is we got to look to them. We got to peel the layers, understand the stories, and we got to take the power for ourselves. Because if nobody's going to invite us to a table, we just got to bring ourselves, and that's how we reclaim what was ours all along.
I feel it's so important for us to now understand that these characters are just not, unidirectional. We
Right.
can, interpret them in so many other ways.
Correct.
And specifically Draupadi, I would like to tell again another thing about Draupadi, like about her statecraft. See, she's so efficient in statecraft,
Yeah.
uh, and known for her political astuteness.
Yep.
What are the things you think that today's leaders, both in corporate world and in electoral politics, can take away as a lesson from Draupadi?
So I think that she was a very astute politician. There's absolutely no question in my mind, right? But I also think that she was a very astute woman, period. And I think I take that from, like, let's sort of, put it in real life terms for today. Marriages today, you talk about, one person, one man being married to one woman. How much do we have to adjust with each other, right? Before you get married, you haven't lived with this person. How much do you have to adjust with them? Not sure if you're married. I am, so I can speak from
Yes, I
experience.
am also. Absolutely.
So it's so it takes a lot, right, to be married to one person, to learn the things that they're good at, bad at, kind of work together and stuff like that. Now imagine one woman being married to five men. How much would she have to learn? How much would she have to adjust? And how much would she have to sort of prop up one on their good days, and sort of, bring others down if they're being too nasty, or, being too self-confident or whatever. And I think that in itself is a skill, right? Like managing people, if for the people who work in the corporate world and in government, managing upwards is always a big thing that many of us are not good at, because we get afraid. We just want to sort of be like, oh my god, I don't know how to handle this, and just want to kind of go back into the cave. I think that she teaches us that. She teaches us how to manage upward, how to manage, the people around you, right? And when you look at it, when you look at the Pandavas, they weren't just the five greatest, the five men. They were the five greatest warriors of their time, and they were sons of gods. So obviously they had their own issues as well, right? Like whatever those issues look like. And to be able to navigate those issues is also an art in itself, and I think she did that pretty flawlessly. You never hear of her any in any scripture anywhere. You never hear of any of her husbands complaining about her, right? They sort of, yeah, they say, yeah, she's very powerful, like she's, we've burned in her fire many times, and we sort of almost, there's almost sort of like a respectful fear of her, right, in the presence of her husbands. And again, like, it blows my mind, because it's like these are the five greatest warriors of all time, and they were afraid of her. And that's because she had this power to, be able to cast that kind of a net. I also think she was a great manager of people, right? Like, look at the situation where she told Arjun, she said, never get, she had this thing that if you get married to other women, they're not allowed in the palace. And then Subhadra comes along, right, because of Krishna's being really cheeky about this, and he brings Subhadra in
Yeah,
some way, in front of Draupadi. And what does Draupadi do? She accepts her.
accepts.
They become very good friends, right? At the end of the war, when Subhadra's son is sort of killed in battle. I'm blanking out on his name for a second here. um, but when he dies in the Chakravyu, um, and
Abhimanyu.
Abhimanyu, thank you. And the wife is giving birth. Uttara is giving birth. She's there. She's there for them. She's there for her family, right? So she does understand the importance of family. She does understand the importance of, when new people come in, take them in with kindness, treat them well, and prosper together, right? Like that was her whole thing. Like, for her, the family was a unit above everything else. And I think it's very poignant to point out that she didn't have a childhood. So she did not know what childhood is like. She did not know what parental love is like, because she was born a full grown woman, and she came out of her father's desire for revenge. So she never even growing up had a traditional relationship with her parents, right? Because she came out as a full grown woman. She did not have a close relationship. Never in the scriptures her mother is mentioned, right? You only hear about the father. Her mother is an afterthought. So that probably means that they were not close. They didn't talk much. Maybe her mother and her didn't really share a relationship. And for her mother, she was like, okay, she's just another woman I have in the palace, not someone I gave birth to, right? So there wouldn't have been that emotional bond that a mother and daughter share. So she had no one to look up to know how to conduct in a family unit. But somehow she passes all those tests with flying colors. And she does really well, not just in terms of managing people, but also giving people advice, learning and teaching Krishna as they go sort of along. And that's where the whole politician aspect of the story comes in, because in my mind, Krishna was the greatest politician of all time. And he was a very close friend of Draupadi. So obviously, they had a lot of discussions that were meaningful that could then be passed on to the rulers and to her husbands. Um, and I think that all of that together kind of shows us that in spite of not living the life, she managed to give her family the life in the best possible way. And again, I think that is a lesson as well for all of us. And for me personally, it has been a huge lesson because I had a very untraditional childhood. And I kind of moved through all of that over time and was able to, and I'm still, still sort of working through a lot of kinks in my life, but I'm able to sort of pass along a traditional childhood, or a normal, whatever normal looks like, to my daughter. Keeping aside the bad memories and keeping aside the things I had to navigate in my life, so that she has a life that is different, and again, normal, quote unquote, from what I did. So I think that there's so many lessons for us in all of these things.
That's really interesting. Uh, Also, I would like to ask you another question that in an interview earlier, you have quoted that Trihayani begins where all the stories end. And
Yeah.
this somehow, really catched my attention. And I really wanted to know about your process of writing, which culminated into this beautiful piece of work. Could you also please share some insights based on your experience as an author?
I'm so glad you asked that question. So Trihayani does begin where everything else ends, right? Where the Mahabharata ends, rather. And when I wrote this book, or when I started writing this book, I had absolutely no idea where I was going with it. Um, I know you've read a little bit of it. You're still working your way through it. And when you start the book, you read about Krishna, right? And it was just one of those days where that story came to me. I'm very attached to the Somnath temple, which is in Gujarat, and my grandmother and I were very good friends before she passed 10 years ago. And she would tell me stories of Somnath all the time. That temple holds a very special significance in my heart. Just because of its sheer history. If you look back to the history, how many times it was plundered and it kept rising like a phoenix from the ashes. It's just a beautiful story there. And what I also love about the Somnath is it's one of the few places, if not maybe the only place, where Krishna and Shiv meet. Because this is a temple for Shiv, but at the same time, that's where Krishna pretty much, breathed his last around that
Yeah.
temple area. And so for me, being sort of looking up to these two, gods, Krishna and Mahadev, I wanted to bring them together as a tribute. And I started writing it. And then I knew I wanted to write about Draupadi because, hell, who doesn't want to write about Draupadi? Um, and but I wanted to make it different because there's so much that's been written traditionally about Draupadi's life as it is written in the Mahabharata, right? Like we've had many different versions of how she taught, how she was behaving, what was she doing, what was going through her mind, all of these. And with due respect to all of them, I think those stories are absolutely required and very powerful. But for me, it was sort of looking beyond that, right? We've all stopped where the war ends. And then what happens? And then we say it's happily ever after, right? We say the Pandavas got on the throne, Yudhishthir ruled for a long time, then they all went away, and then they died, and the end. But real life is not happily ever after. Real life is never happily ever after. It's what you make of it,
Right.
right? And so for me, when I started thinking about that, I'm thinking, okay, so this woman who had a very traumatic life, right? Because if you look at it, there is a lot of trauma filled in her life throughout the time that she's born up until the war ends. What was she like afterwards? What happened to her? And so I put myself in that mindset. And I said, all right, let's try to imagine for a second here what that would be like. And for me, the answer was very clear that even though Yudhishthir got what he wanted and there was peace in the kingdom and he was king and the Pandavas were doing very well, it was very difficult for me to think that Draupadi would be done. And so, in my mind, Draupadi had many questions that she was still looking for answers, right? And so she finally says, okay, now that, because it's now that everyone has what they want and sort of, things are good, let me take care of myself, which again is so typical, right? Like the woman does everything for everyone else. And then she's like, all right, now if there is time, I'll go look after myself. And so then there's that time for her now. Now she can go look after herself. So she goes searching for answers, right? And she goes to Somnath, of all places. She goes there. And there she meets Mahadev. And then together they both go on a search with Draupadi and Mahadev together go on a search for answers, where she finds things that she never thought were possible. And how does all of that culminate into giving her the inner peace that she has wanted, not just in this life, but in many lives, right? So that is what the story is about. The story is completely fictional. It has nothing to do with the Mahabharata. It's an extension of the Mahabharata because it ends after the war begins, after the war ends. My apologies. And it is completely based on where Draupadi thinks she needs to go. So for the first time in her life, she's doing what she wants to do. And she's looking for answers in the way that she wants to go look for answers. And I think that is why it is such a powerful sort of reclamation of Draupadi's story, because now it's handed back to her. And she is the narrator. She is telling us what's going on. And how how she finds herself in the middle of all of this. And that's why that's why I said what I said, is that it begins where everything else ends.
Draupadi is so liberating as a character, and when you are, writing about Draupadi, just wanted to ask that whether you also felt liberated as an author while you were writing it.
I did. I felt, a double liberation, I'll tell you, because one is, like you said, Draupadi is very liberating in itself, right? Like you have to reclaim a piece of your power to write about the most powerful woman in mythology, I feel. So without that, it's impossible to even imagine, because the way I write, and maybe different, is I put myself in that mindset, like I was telling you a little bit earlier. So I'm literally imagining the day to day for her and what she's going. Oh, she's walking down this palace. She's doing this. She's talking to this one. She's dressed like this. Oh, the earring is too heavy. Oh, like just sort of like that mindset that she could have had. And so that in itself was liberating, because first of all, I was going back to a time where no, none of us were there. So like sort of imagining outside the realm of imagination, so to speak. And second, I think it was also very liberating because I wasn't confined to the traditional narrative of Draupadi. I did not have to operate in this space, right? Like my story ends after this space concludes. So I was able to just sort of go on this joyride and write whatever came into my mind about her. Like I imagined her, you know, in ways that were very different and in ways that were very distinct, um, and in ways where she was able to claim her power. And so it wasn't limiting at all, so to speak, for me. And that made it so liberating, um, because again, I was not confined to anything in particular. And to be able to imagine that and to be able to write that and to give words to that, felt good, because it also felt like I was doing, very, very humbly, I was doing a service to her, because never has her power been shown like this. and to give voice to her, you know, um, it felt really really amazing to be able to do that.
Okay, so another question, which I think it's very important for all the budding authors. How was your journey, publishing journey with Readomania?
So, Rinomania is a great team. Dipankar is absolutely wonderful. Indrani is a gem. She is just so good, and the entire creative team. They were very open to the story when everybody else wasn't, right? Because, like I said, it's so difficult to have another book about Draupadi when there have been so many books already. So it's like every time I wrote to somebody, they were like, well, how is this different from this story? How is this different from that story? And I'm like, well, read it. Read it to find out. That's the whole idea. And when I said that it begins where everything else ends, I think it didn't make an impact on people in terms of they either didn't believe it or they thought I was mincing my words. um, and so, I was very grateful to Dipankar, who actually took the time to read it, right? Because when he read it, he came to me and he said, this is an amazing story. And I was like, I know. I know. Let's do something about it. And so I think that, if folks take the time to read it, I think they're really going to love it, because it's, again, like I said, it's very different, and it talks about an aspect of Draupadi that has never been explored. um, and that being said, so I'm very grateful to the Readomania team, the creative team as well, who came up with a fantastic cover for the book. Um, and were able to sort of give it the life that it needed, to breathe into it, to make it a living, breathing story, and to make it a book, which is now out in bookstores, which, again, blows my mind, because it's the first time that, I have something with my name on it. um, but I think that, I'm very grateful to them for that. I'm very grateful to them for their help, and I'm very grateful to them for their support, because without that, folks would have just thought that it's just another story about Draupadi, and a story that we don't need. So it's been wonderful. It's been very, very nice.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this very insightful conversation and for your time this evening.
Thank
Also,
you.
I would like to Also, I would like to remind that tellmeastory.biz calls for registration for TMYS review September 2022, themed on food and drinks in association with York Center for Asian Research. Last date for submission is 20th June. Till then, stay well, stay safe, happy reading, and happy writing. Good night.
Bye. Thank you.